All right, coming up on our Finding Better podcast, I've got Nicole Van Kuppeveld joining me. She is an expert on leadership, and we're going to talk about masculine leadership, we're going to talk about feminine leadership, and we're going to talk about the sweet spot that's somewhere in between. Amazing, amazing conversation. It applies to you, it applies to me, it applies to all of us whenever we deal with people. Because here's the bottom line, folks, whether you're leading with a good example or a bad example, you are leading by example. And Nicole is going to share with us amazing tips, amazing tricks of things to do, things not to do that you can incorporate in your life right now. So thanks for coming. Here we go. Hello, 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 and welcome back to our Finding Better podcast. My name is John Suzuki, and I'm your host. And this is where we share real life experiences. We don't share academics, theories, or opinions. It's all about real life experiences of things that we've done to find better in our own lives. And the idea is that, sometimes the best way to success is to copy it. And so we're all about experiences here. We are going to talk about leadership today. We're going to talk about good leadership, bad leadership. We're going to talk about how to optimize leadership so to your benefit, you as a leader. If you are not a leader or you don't consider yourself a leader, um, that's okay. Because a lot of people, if you're aspiring to be a leader, here's the bottom line. Whether it's a good example or a bad example, you are leading by example. And so one of the things that we're gonna talk all about leadership today. I have Nicole Van Kuppeveld with me, and she is an expert in leadership and helping companies understand how they can improve their businesses with better leadership. And we're going to talk about the benefits. There are huge, huge benefits in terms of helping companies improve their leadership, improve their cultures. We are going to talk uniquely today about masculine characteristics as well as feminine characteristics and blending the both, Nicole, blending both so that we can optimize that whole process. Nicole, welcome to Finding Better. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be your guest, John.
All right, perfect, perfect, perfect. Hey, listen. All right, so let's talk about leadership. But before we do that, I mean, we got a lot of things to talk about, right? The whole feminine, masculine thing. I'm all over it. I can't wait. But talk a little bit about your background and how and your journey that led you into what you're doing today in helping folks and companies.
Sure. It goes back to right when I graduated from university in my first professional job. I worked there for 10 years and I had 1,000 clients, and all of them
And what were
were,
you doing? What were you doing that you
I
had a
was
thousand clients?
doing vocational counseling.
Got
So I
it.
was
Okay.
working with different people from different industries, a real wide array of people. And so what I was seeing was what we now call, toxic workplaces. And so back then, as a leadership researcher, I started to ask some questions and I started to look at some trends. And what I found out was that people were getting sick, people were leaving the workplace, but the common denominator was the person that was managing them in the workplace. They either had no idea how to manage people, or they were desperately in need of leadership training, but there was no budget for it, or they couldn't access it. So that was what
And
I
so
found.
so that these toxic environments, um, you found, I guess, the most common denominator was the actual leader, was the person, right? So it wasn't the company, it wasn't the weather, it was the actual person that all of these people, not single person, but the person that all these people reported to.
Mhm.
Presumably, there's a thousand different people, so somewhere close to that number of ineffective or toxic leaders, right?
Right. And the sad part was, like I said, that some of them were really wanting to learn how to do it differently. They were technically very capable in their field, whether they were accountants leading a team or auto mechanics leading a team, but they really did not have those people skills. They didn't know how to create their best team environment. And so they did impact the culture. They did impact the people that worked for them. They did impact their teams. And that rippled out to their organizations too. Because what happened was people would leave. There would be high turnover, there would be low retention, poor engagement, really difficult to recruit, to that particular team, because nobody wanted to work there.
Yeah, it's funny because, people ask me all the time, John, what's the most important thing that I need to be aware of as I look for my next step? And I always tell them, without exception, that the most important thing is your boss. Because, or the person you're going to be reporting to or responsible to. And, you could work for the best company in the world, but if the person that you are reporting to um, is toxic, uh, it doesn't matter how great the company is or how wonderful the company is, right? Because
Right.
um, that person is responsible for you, and you are responsible to that person, and so it makes it really tough that way.
Yeah, and I can't remember who gets credit for the quote, we don't quit our jobs, we quit our leaders, right? We quit our
Yeah,
bosses, right? So we leave. And those costs, are evident today. Like one in four Americans are thinking about quitting their job. One in two are actually looking for one right now. The Society for Human Resource Management, big report, $223 billion spent on turnover costs over the past 5 years. That has a significant impact to the bottom line. So when we're talking about creating teams and people that are valued, that are supported, that are, it makes a difference.
if my math is right, $200 billion over 5 years is $40 billion a year. That's a huge impact. That's a huge impact. So as you look at this world that you're trying to help make better, um, okay, what are some of the main benefits that companies and leaders have achieved in terms of building better work environments? You mentioned
Well,
retention.
right. Yeah. So people who are led by those kinds of leaders that, have an ability to create environments where their teams say, hip, hip, hooray, I get to come to work for John today. I mean, those people stay, they work extra hard. They're committed to the purpose and the mission and the vision of the organization. From a recruitment perspective, people are standing in line at the door to get into organizations that have that kind of culture and that kind of leadership, instead of the opposite, where they're running out the door as fast as they can. Performance is improved because in those types of cultures and in those teams with that kind of leader, you're learning together, you're innovating together, and you know, you're feeling valued, right? You're leveraging that diversity. You're maximizing all of those team players that come to the table, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think of in my life, I've worked for great leaders and not so great leaders. And when I think about the great leaders, I think about exactly those things that you just talked about. I I woke up in the morning and I was ready to go. I couldn't wait to get to work. I couldn't wait to get to work to the people I worked with and the people who I was responsible for with my own teams. I couldn't wait to work with my customers, right? Because I was in sales, and one of the things also there's other um, indirect or soft benefits, right? Because I found that when my energy is really, really great as a result of this collaborative team of people that was completely aligned, that energy extended outside the organization. That energy extended to the support team internally. It outside of the sales team. It extended to the what we call the customer engineering. Anyway, it extends not only outbound outside of your department, but outbound of your company to my clients. I mean, it just, on the other hand, I've also worked with organizations in the same company where the leader was an absolute train wreck. And I didn't trust him. And he told me that I had to lie to my customer. I ended up leaving the company because I just wasn't willing to do that. And his boss wasn't willing to fix it. And, and so, yeah, I mean, there's just so, I teach martial arts. I'm a karate sensei. And, the thing about your fist is that with a single finger, you can do some damage, but when you bring everything together and you bring teams of people together, you can move mountains, right? And that's the difference. Am I off? Am I unique in that feeling?
No, no,
Okay.
not at all. And that sense that you have about that team that you worked on, that was really awesome. That boss that you would do anything for, the one you wanted to make look good, the one that you just, yeah, you just couldn't wait to be there because he created that environment for you.
And he lifted everybody. He lifted everybody. As he lifted me, I lifted everybody. We weren't competitive with each other. We weren't backstabbing each other. We weren't talking behind each other's backs. I mean, we were moving forward. I mean, we were just this big old energy ball, right? And I think back on the other side, and we're the exact opposite.
Yes.
Nobody trusted each other. Everybody was like doing things behind their backs, and it was just different nefarious things that were happening. It was icky. It was
Yeah,
icky.
it's palpable. Like you can
Yeah.
tell the difference, and that difference, whether it's that positive environment or that other leader who's creating all of those icky things that you talked about. Yeah, that's what we don't want, right?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you talk a lot about is feminine characteristics, right? Bringing more feminine characteristics into business and into your leadership. Now, you also have the masculine characteristics, right? And I don't want to assume that what you're saying is that feminine characteristics are good and all masculine characteristics are bad, right? So, so help me do a comparison. If you think about the world that we live in, and two or three characteristics of masculinity um, that are offset and balanced by feminine characteristics. Can you do that?
Yeah, I sure can. And I like
Okay.
to call them masculine power qualities and feminine power qualities because
Ooh,
yes,
nice.
yes,
Yes.
because they're they're all good. And it's how we integrate them into our leadership and how we find that balance that you were talking about earlier and how we know when to use one or the other. You know, so if we're going to kind of look at just comparing a few indicators,
So
but
first of all, just real quick, I love that you said that they're all good. They're
yeah,
all good. It's circumstantial, right? But they're all good. So you're not saying bring in these feminine power qualities and dispense with the masculine ones. You're saying, hey, it's all good, guys. We just got to understand what we're doing and when we're using them. That's wonderful.
yeah. And speaking about good guys, like a shout out to all of the male men leaders who got us to the point where we are today, right? You've created societies, you've created architecture, medicine. I mean, of course, feminine leaders have come on board during that history of evolution, and they have added to that. But what we're talking about here are some of the benefits of infusing or integrating some of these feminine qualities because I think that in a lot of cases today, with some of the complexity and the challenges that we have, some of those male power qualities are not as effective as some of the feminine qualities. And the other thing that I want to say is this is for men and women. So this is about men infusing feminine power qualities into their leadership and about women, being able to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more later, hopefully, about how we can shift some of those paradigms and move into some of those pathways to make that happen a little bit more. But for the purpose of like very specific. So,
Hmm.
three male power qualities that are really great things are being logical,
Okay.
being linear, and
Being what?
linear, right?
Linear. Okay,
Yeah, like
linear.
you have
Okay.
this plan and this process, and we're just going to work that plan and that process, right? Like that's our end goal. That's where we're going.
Sounds good to me.
Uh-huh. I'm sure it does, John. And then the third one, just for the purposes of, there's a whole bunch of qualities, but would be like independent. So it's like me. I can do this by myself. I don't need anybody. I don't need a team. I don't need other people's opinions. Like I'm on this, I can do it on my own.
Boy,
But
there's a lot that goes into that.
right?
There's a lot
So
that
if
goes into that.
we look at the non-linear, when I think of that, I think of it as an iterative process, right? So yes, we have an end goal, but there's many roads that lead to Rome. And as we're going to Rome, we need to be able to pause along the way and say, hey, are we going okay? What's going well? Do we need to just, adjust a little bit? So it's that constant kind of learning and that iterative kind of up and down, or I kind of think of it as these loops, right? So that we're going to get there, but it's just not a straight shot because we have to be course correcting along the way, and we have to be, making sure that, yeah. So
So
with
in
the
that
sec,
in that example of the road to Rome, right? Me, I've got this thing set. As a guy, I'm like, okay, got the map. We're going that way. Bridge is out. Damn it, we're still going that way, right? You kind of got now. Of course, now we have Google Maps and Apple Maps and all that kind of stuff, so we just follow that logic. But anyway, yes, we need to be more flexible
yes, right.
sometimes.
And the second one is the logical, and the complementary one to that one, I think, would be being more intuitive. And I got a bit of a logical brain myself. I got that's a strong masculine power quality for me. And but there's times when we need to really trust our intuition, right? And we need to say, oh, maybe there's some signs here, and we won't get into what intuition means today, but really it's all that collective experience, knowledge, things that you've read, things that you've had that are telling you, John, maybe you need to pay attention and, like, don't stay on that path to Rome that you're on with that bridge. Trust your
Something
intuition.
tells me
Trust
you're
your
on the right
intuition.
path. You're on the wrong
That's right.
path.
Yeah, turn the other way, go a different
Yeah.
direction, right? So that's kind of that intuition thing, right? And then the last one, just for the purposes of example, is, that independent versus that interdependent. And oh my goodness, those teams that you're talking about and examples that I'm happy to share of teams that I worked on, like those best teams, they are the ones that are taking all of those wonderful individuals that have diversity, bringing them to the table, leveraging them, allowing them to operate to the full extent of their capacity, and, valuing what they offer, to the team. And so the interdependence that we have to have can really help us find much better innovative solutions, get places faster, be able to deal with some of the complexity that we have today. So that's, there's three examples there.
Well, one way that I look at this, and tell me if I'm looking at it right. I learned, I heard and learned long, long ago. In fact, from my first boss, and this was back in the 80s, so it's been a long time. But the idea of great leaders surrounding themselves with people better than they are, right? That's what we're talking about with interdependence, right? And that's I've lived by that for almost four decades. And when I would build teams, I would always look for people who were better than me. And and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And for me, as the quote unquote leader, it kind of put a burden on me that said, you know what? I ain't going to be the weak link in this group. I refused. And so my ego kind of kicked in and made me even better, right? And I like to think that we had really, really good teams. But yeah, that interdependence part of it is hugely important.
Yeah, and I think back, I mean, who were my first teachers? My father, was a general manager for a large global company. He was their local operation here, and he did exactly that. He hired the best people in, the various roles, and then he just moved barriers out of their way and gave them the resources that they need. So when you think about being that leader that you were, John, I mean, my dad was very good at his job, but it's also about just making that space, giving them the resources, removing the barriers. You're kind of just that cheerleader that's just like, let's go, right? Like, we
You're
got
the
this. And
enabler. You're the enabler,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's your job. Your job
You're
is
the
to hire
empowerer.
amazing
Yep.
people and to allow them to, work in a culture where they, can just function to their doing what they love doing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and to the contrary, it just occurred to me that the leaders who one of the common characteristics, if you will, of all the people who I don't consider good leaders is that they surround themselves with people they thought they could control. And of course, in my case, no, I'm not somebody you can control. I'm going to do what's right, regardless of what you think. But that is something that they want to control their environment, right? They want to control
Right.
everything that happened.
And if we think about those masculine qualities, control would be in that column, right? That
Yep,
need to control instead of that need to empower and
right.
give that lift to those people on the team. So I don't really like sharing this story, but I know this broadcast is about stories. And so I worked for a leader like that. She was a woman who was raised during an era where she had to, adopt many masculine power qualities in order to climb and break through that inner glass ceiling. And I was so excited about this position that I had. I was at the top of this huge stack of applicants, and she hired me, and I lasted 6 weeks.
You lasted 6 weeks.
I lasted 6 weeks. And when the HR director came in, so during the course of that 6 weeks, she was so much in control that she actually said in a meeting with 65 of us executives from across our state health authority that she should clone herself as Dolly the sheep, basically insinuating that the rest of us were like, not able or capable or couldn't do what she did. So,
Oh my
anyways,
goodness.
when the HR director came to terminate me, she said to me, she said, Nicole, you were my candidate of choice. And she said, and this has absolutely nothing to do with you, right? This has
Good for her.
everything to do with her being intimidated, feeling that there was competition rather than collaboration, feeling that her authority rather than her ability to be a connector and we're being threatened. So, I mean, in hindsight, it's a great thing. I learned some really valuable lessons, went down a real course on trying to figure out what that female to female leadership is like. And so this also makes the point that it's not just about men who have an imbalance of all of these masculine power qualities. It's about females who have completely lost touch with any of their feminine power qualities, are leading from a very masculine, approach, and really feel quite threatened when somebody comes in like me, and am using or, some of those qualities that are the feminine power qualities.
Yeah, and it's there really is a balance, right? There really is a balance, and you know, good and bad, because for example, intuition. You cannot survive forever on intuition alone. You have to have data. You have to, right? In a business, you have to have data. You have to have that logic. And so, just using that as an example, right now, in your case of that situation where you lasted 6 weeks, I mean, that pendulum just went way too far to the other side. And where she was a woman who just took this masculinity and this control factor um, way out of whack. And but that happens. That happens all the time. And yeah, and I would say that it's interesting that you brought up control as that characteristic, because that's got to be really really common in terms of people who in terms of your thousand folks that you worked with, that the people that they worked under wanted to control everything. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think for some of them it was a complete lack of leadership training. There was a desire and a will, and they were aware, they had self-awareness. They're like, oh my goodness, I'm terrible at this people thing. I'd like to learn how to do it. And for some of them, it was, maybe it was a do it my way or hit the highway kind of thing. I think there's probably, like you said, 1,000 different reasons why
Yeah,
each of
yeah.
those individual leaders of those 1,000 clients ended up in that situation that they found themselves in. And I'd like to share another positive story on the other side just to kind of make my point. I mean, I was hired not once but twice by a male leader who taught me a lot about my feminine power qualities. And
A male leader.
a male leader. And I
Okay, good.
worked for him at an agency, and he moved into the state health authority. And I hadn't finished my mentoring with him. And he said, Nicole, will you come, and work at the provincial state level with me as one of our provincial managers? And I said, yes, because I had more to learn from him. He was a good teacher, he was a mentor. And so this gets rid of that whole notion of, you know, that gender thing, because what I'm talking about is infusing our leadership and making sure that we're integrating some of that feminine, because I think today what we're finding is that some of those old models, or those heavily weighted models of masculine power qualities, are not able to address and lead the kinds of teams and organizations and create the kinds of solutions that some of those feminine qualities that we were talking about. I think that they can be very helpful for leaders, whether they're leading organizations, families, communities. I think the ability to do that is needed right now to deal with some of that complexity.
I think that I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the timing is such that um some of the things that are happening in the world are going to force it. And one of the big things that's happening that I'm studying a lot is technology, right? I've been in technology for 40 years. I started with IBM, and I've been all through the days before fax machines, all the way to now. And artificial intelligence is changing the world, and it's going to change the world faster. I mean, it'll be different day after tomorrow, kind of speed. And I coined this phrase that says we've gotten so smart that we've forgotten our heart. And I believe that, I've said this for almost 10 years, that technology is going to force us into a renaissance of the heart.
Mm.
And, as we move forward, of course, one of the biggest questions is AI going to take my job, right? To some people, the answer is yes. To some people, the answer is probably maybe not. But it's going to change things a lot. And, I had a guest on about a month and a half ago, and the title of that podcast was "The Brain Thinks, but the Heart Knows." And she talked about how there have been studies and research at MIT all over that confirms that the heart does have intelligence, and that intelligence communicates with the brain. And as we're learning more and more about this, this intelligence of the heart is going to continue to rise in terms of awareness. And
Mhm.
so what she said was, the intuition, it's a real thing. It's not just, oh gee, I think. No, it's clinically proven with data that the heart has intelligence and that we
Mhm.
need to learn how to listen to that. And so
Mhm.
when I think of masculine logic, I think of brain. When I think of um, feminine intuition, I think of heart,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm one who believes that uh, the one thing that technology will never be able to replace is the human to human connection. It will and heart love. It won't. And
Mhm.
there will come a point in time, and I think it's starting where people are starting to become aware of that
Mhm.
you know what, we need to bring a little bit more heart into the world and bring it back.
Yeah. And I think at the heart of this is about, how we're treating people, how we're valuing people, how we create cultures where they're really embraced and supported and resourced and even the leaders are getting leadership training, right?
Hmm.
And I think this is we often talk about this in the theoretical, right? Like, this is the kind of leadership, that we want. This is the kind of leadership that we need in the world. And I think, there maybe this is my masculine power qualities kicking in here, but we also need the how-tos, right? So, I mean, when we're talking about developing this type of leadership with our clients, we're looking at three pillars. One of them is being able to create what Amy Edmondson calls a psychologically safe workspace. And there's a whole bunch that goes into creating that environment where people feel they can share their ideas, where people feel their voice can be heard at the table. I just had a marketing intern finish and she's orienting the new marketing intern. And she said, I said, I saw Shirley's confidence, really climb during the placement. And she said, that's because you gave me a voice, Nicole. That's because you allowed me, right, and encouraged me to share my knowledge. So being able that trust that you talked about, John, that's all part of that boss that you had that you trusted and the one that you didn't. That was not a psychologically safe environment. We
Right,
see and
right.
watch at work, right? Like, oh, what happens to John when he
Oh
says
yeah,
that to the leader? Oh, that's what happens. So I'm not going to do that.
that's
The
right.
second
That's
thing
right.
is those are norms, right? We watch
Yep.
that. Just like I'm sure people watched me in that scenario that I talked about earlier and thought, oh, whatever Nicole did, we better not do that or we're going to be the next one on the
And
chopping
and the and the opposite is true, right? I mean, oh, he John said this, and they actually did it, and he disagreed with in the meeting, and
and it was
man,
okay.
it was okay. They it was cool. So it
Yeah,
goes both
exactly.
ways, right? Yeah,
Yeah. The
reinforcement.
second one is those building collaborative learning teams, and we've talked about those. You and I have been talking about a lot of traits of what those teams look like. And, for people that are listening, think about that best team that you've ever been on, right? Like what made it so different than maybe a team you're on now? What allowed you to just, do what John and that team he was describing was doing, right? You just like can almost read each other's minds and you're just in the flow and you're just like, you just work together. You're just this well-oiled machine and you're just, leveraging everything. And it's just such a great experience and it's fun. That's what a collaborative learning team is. And the third part is creating a learning organization. And so when we talk about this, we're not talking about, learning how to do this, that, or the other thing, but we're talking about like how are we learning together? And the example I'd like to use is the US military uses something called an after action review. And we actually integrate that into our work. We call it stop, start, continue. But basically, they spend time after a big event, right? And they bring the whole system in the room and they say, what went well, what didn't go well, what will we do next time? And there's no blame, there's no finger pointing. It's all about learning what we're going to do to improve. and what we're going to do to get better and how we're going to do it even, better the next time around. So, learning how to lead, uh, you know, I don't know if leaders are, born, or if they are, they also need to be trained in the trenches from mentors, from reading books, but they also need leadership development, right? It's an important component to be able to lead these kinds of teams and create these environments that people really seem to want. And the good news is you can learn how to do that.
When you talk about training and so forth and being born with leadership, I think that there are those that are, right? I believe that there are those that are born more predisposed to leadership characteristics and those that aren't, right? But in either case, nobody's born perfect, right? So whether you are strong in that area or not so strong in that area, we can all use training. And one of the best definitions I've heard between being a manager and being a leader is that being a manager is assigned, being a leader is earned, and
Mhm.
um, and respect is earned, and so the, this it's amazing to me as I think about I as I think about one of the best teams I ever worked for. We collaborated, we liked each other, we were there for each other. There was no backstabbing. I mean, we were just moving forward on behalf of the company and behalf of our customers. And it was wonderful. But then I think about what would have happened to that group of people if one of the lousy managers I worked for became the leader of that group. Okay. The group dynamics would definitely have changed. Definitely. I think that we would have tried to continue with it, but that reinforcement that says, okay, we're doing a postmortem and well, John, you screwed up, or Terry, you screwed up, or Clara, why the hell did you do that? Right? I mean, if that was the kind of postmortem that we did, we'd just be like sitting back in our chairs, just not participating at all.
Mhm. Well, and
Because
the power of a group that's that connected and doing that kind of work when the new leader comes in, I would be hoping that they'd be giving people on the team an opportunity to sit in and hire the next manager or the next leader, right? That they would have a say, that somebody would be there at the table. And that they would be able to maybe, I don't know,
yeah,
move that
yeah,
leader a little bit, move the needle a little bit in that direction of the team. But then if you can't do
ideally.
it, if
Mhm.
you ideally, absolutely, because we always have to have hope for that. And then if you can't do it, what ends up happening is the team gets disengaged, they get disinterested, they start flipping through LinkedIn looking for jobs. All of a sudden,
That's
people
exactly
are
right.
leaving, right? And these are the kinds of things that, as someone who's in charge of a huge HR budget, or a strategic HR leader, or a COO who's in charge of your budget for leadership development, I mean, these are some of the trends you have to be looking at. I mean, if your turnover, and your engagement studies are going down, over the course of time, and your turnover is going up, you need to start asking questions about, like, what is going on here within the organization. And like I said, the good news is that it's something that you can train into. You can, have those leadership retreats. You can do those training programs, and you can give those leaders, especially the ones that don't have it, like you said, continuous development and continuous learning, who want that. We did a client meeting just a couple weeks ago with a huge group of social workers and psychologists. They work and at the end of our day together, we always do a closing circle. And, one of them said, they don't teach us this in school, Nicole. Like, we learn all these theories, but we don't learn how to manage teams. We don't learn how to manage people. And so our day was spent doing very practical. It was around building confidence, in communication for leaders. And they were just like, this is what we need. This is perfect. Like these are the practical skills that we need. We're very competent. There's that example again. We're very competent in our work as clinicians, but now you're asking us to manage teams, and it's like,
Yeah, and here and when they here's the thing about schools, and it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. Schools teach smarts. They do not teach heart,
mm,
right? They don't. And the thing and they teach leadership, but they teach the logical part of leadership. They
mm,
teach the academic part of leadership. But so much of leadership is really heart based. I've patterned my whole career around this one saying that they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that goes with anybody you associate with on planet Earth. And and at work, especially as a leader, right?
mhm.
If you show when you show people that you care about them, because it's all about caring about your people.
Yeah, it's about caring about your people, but it's also more than that. So, in that particular client engagement that I was talking about when we were building their confidence in leadership, in communication, we had really the focus of it was on having difficult conversations about how to manage performance
Sure.
appraisals, right? Because we have to be able, sometimes again, that balance of caring and having those tough conversations, can get a little bit off balance too. So I don't want your listeners to go away believing that, if you just care for people and, sometimes caring is having those tough conversations, right? Sometimes
Oh,
that caring,
absolutely.
right, is being able
Absolutely.
to, yeah, to have those difficult conversations in a very, professional, kind, caring way, but people
But
need to understand.
you know what they call that in my world?
Hmm.
Tough love.
Yes, we used
Tough
to call
love.
that with our teenagers. Yes,
Yeah, right?
that's right. Yes,
And
yeah,
anybody who's raised kids, it's tough love, right? But again, it's love. The
yeah,
core of it is love. And it's um if you don't care about your people, you're not gonna give them the training. You're not gonna get you know what I mean? I mean it's if you care more about yourself, here's the bottom line for me. If you care more about yourself than the people around you, you're not going to get as far as you could. And
yeah. And we talk
great,
about moving from me to we to us, right? So moving concentrically away from, just me, myself, and I to, my responsibilities and, my leading of my team. And then, that further concentric circle out there about us. Because then if we can do that as an individual leader, if we can do that with our teams, then we're going to see the impacts in our organization. We're going to see it in our partnerships. We're going to see it in our community. Yeah, we have to move away from that. Yeah, that's self-centered. It's all about me. I'm going to climb to the top of the ladder as fast as I can. Well, good luck.
right, exactly. So okay, I got maybe this is a tough question, not a tough love question, but a tough question. Um, so let's say that we're out there. Do you have like, I don't know, three barometric indicators that say, "Ooh," right? I mean that raises a flag. Oh, all my people are quitting. I don't know, right? But something that tells a person, you need to, yeah, you might want to consider evaluating a little bit about yourself. I mean, are there those kinds of things that people can look out for that says, yeah, maybe it's me? Because that's tough, right? It's
Oh,
really tough.
and you know what? And it's what separates the clients that we work with from the ones that we don't, because those leaders have to be able to ask themselves exactly that question that
Right,
you
right.
asked. And it does, I don't want spoiler alert, it starts with you, right? It starts with you and how you're leading and what you're saying and not saying and what you're doing and not doing. and being able to see the impact of doing or not doing on the people that you're managing, right? So it is about self-reflection, it is about awareness, and it is about a willingness to learn to do it a different way, not a better way, but a different way that's going to produce some different results. So I would say to your question, some of the red flags that you're going to sense out there are, you know, that turnover is one of them, but that sense that you talked about this is an icky place to work. This is I'm getting the, I don't trust, I'm, that sort of sense that you talked about whatever, the good and the bad. I mean, people feel that, right? They feel like when they know they're working for someone that's good and someone that's, not that kind of leader. And the turnover, I mean, the engagement studies, the engagement surveys that you're doing. I mean, what are you doing with those, right? Are you looking at them and are you really figuring out, is this within a certain department of the organization? Is this, rampant throughout the organization? You know, yeah. And people will tell you, if you ask them, they'll tell you, in a safe enough space, they'll tell you what's going on and what's not working and what
But
needs
there
to
has to
change.
be trust. There has to be trust,
There has to be
right?
trusted advisors, people that they feel they can go to, or structures that are set up.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. But they're absolutely at the bottom of it, of all of this is, you're going to do as you say as you do, and I'm going to watch you. And when you're going to model the way you're going to, like you said, John, that team that you built that you talked about. I mean, it helped you to even elevate yourself up to a higher standard, right? Like you
Yeah.
didn't
No,
want to
that's
be the
right.
lowest. You didn't want to be the lowest one you wanted to be
Yeah.
equal with them,
When you
right? You wanted to keep
that's
developing
right.
at that level. Yeah.
And this is going back to the surrounding yourself with people better than you, right? And you do that, you guys, there's a catch. And the catch is you don't want to be the low. I don't, you know, it motivated me more to not be the low man on that totem pole. And so we all lifted each other. And
And
it
you all
was it was
kept
just
each
wonderful.
other up, right? It's that level, it's that, that they talk about those flat teams, right? And I think, I love that example of, the janitor at the Kennedy Space Center way back when, when they were interviewing, they asked him, like, "Well, what do you do here?" And he said, "Well, I help put people on the moon." Right? I mean, and so that ability that everybody plays a key part and everybody needs to excel. Even the janitor needs to keep that building pretty clean when all those scientists and researchers are there, right? Like it's an important thing to have that hygiene and that cleanliness. And everybody plays a part and they need to feel like they play a part and they need to feel valued. And we need to leverage that diversity. And when we can do that, then, we're all doing it together, whether no matter what position we're in on the team, even if we're the leader, we have to keep
And
doing it.
what an amazing example of that janitor at NASA, right? I mean, when he's doing his work with the language in his head going, I'm helping putting people into space. I'm helping to put people on the moon. It's very different than I'm cleaning these toilets so some jerk guy can go take care of his business, right? I mean, it's different. And when you have a culture, and evidently that culture was there at that time, um, that lifts people, right? Um, it just it's all good. It's all good, right? It's good for the organization. It's good for the individual. It's good for the people around him. It's good for, anyway.
And
It's
you know
just all
what
good.
else it's good for? It's good for business because we are going to see exponential change in the next, 10 years. That's going to be the equivalent of 100 years. And if
Yep,
you, as a corporate leader or someone who's leading a team, are not investing in this kind of leadership, not only are you not going to thrive, but you're not going to survive because you are not going to have that agility and that innovation and that ability to be able to stay ahead of the pack in your industry and be able to create solutions to
that's
these
right.
big
Create.
problems
Yep,
that keep getting bigger and bigger. Yeah.
yep. One thing that you and I have not talked about, my last role in my professional career, had the title. global evangelist and ombudsman. And people went, it was with Expedia. And I was the only person in the entire company that had that role. And it was the honor of my life, really. Because as ombudsman, um, what happens is that generally a person put into that role is a trusted senior executive type person, and the role of that person is to just take input, not make any judgments, not give any solutions, but to be there as a trusted person. For example, when someone had a concern that they wanted to take to HR but didn't trust HR, didn't feel comfortable, they could come to me. And they could don't know that I wasn't going to say anything to anybody, but I was just going to listen to them. I did that with my customers. And two ears, one mouth. That's how I live my life, right?
Mm.
Lots of listening. But what my role was as an executive was to take all that feedback. And when I saw trends and when I saw groupings, I would let the executive team know. We got a whole group of customers that's worth about $2 billion in revenue that are really, really unhappy with these three things, right?
Beautiful.
For some reason they'd listen to me. We'd make the changes, right? Same thing with the teams, right? People would come to me and say, "Hey, John, I'm seeing these things happen internally. Something's going on," and I'd be the guy that would be collecting the trends in my head, communicating them. And I'll tell you something. From that role, we saved billions and billions of dollars in revenue
Hmm.
by listening and by showing that we cared, and by lifting people and by helping them know that they're valued, right?
And you did a couple of other things too. You made meaning out of data and you turned it into information that, still maintaining confidences, you were able to
Right.
share with the executive and save billions of dollars. And this type of leadership that you and I are talking about, if you can get it in your organization, if you can train leaders, it's also going to save you billions of dollars. It might actually make you billions of dollars because if you have that kind of team, like
Oh,
what
absolutely.
can you not do,
Absolutely.
right? Like
Absolutely.
the sky's the limit.
And that's where I really love what you're talking about, because when we talk about the feminine and the masculine, but there's a whole nother dimension in terms of cultural, right? And it's all about people's backgrounds. It's all about people's own personal experiences. And when we can open our eyes as leaders and be accepting of the things that we see, hear, and feel, you can move mountains. You can move
Hmm.
mountains,
Hmm.
um, and break out of whatever insecurities or ego we've got, or need for control. And so I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing.
Can we agree then, John, that maybe one of the masculine power qualities that we might need to sort of down a little bit would be that ego thing in all categories, whether you're a feminine woman leader who's leading from a very masculine standpoint. I think we could do with a lot less ego
I,
and a
I,
lot
I,
more collaboration and a lot more listening and a lot more inclusion and leveraging diversity and right, we could use a lot more than that because we're going to need some really good people and really heads at all of our tables, no matter what we're doing in the world, in order to be able to do the kinds of things that we need to do. And you, yourself, and I, and one person is just not going to cut it.
I will say this. I will say this, and in general, I agree with you. But it's also circumstantial. There are times when we need people with ego. But in general, I think a lowering of ego and a raising of humility would do nothing but good for this world. And I am known for saying that ego is born of weakness and humility is born of strength.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, the strongest person I know on this planet is the most humble person I've ever known on this planet. And so, but yes, yes, check your ego.
Yeah, and I'm going to
for sure.
contribute to some of those resources that you're going to put out there with the podcast because one of my teachers is Edgar Schein, and he actually wrote Humble Leadership and Humble Inquiry. And so, yes, humility. Yes, I'm going to agree with you on that one. Yeah,
And by the way, I didn't know that we disagreed with anything, but
yeah,
yeah, I can honestly say that humility, you know, it's a lot easier to have open minds and open eyes when you have a little bit of humility
and open
um,
hearts.
and open hearts. Absolutely, because
Mhm.
because you're humble. And humility means that you're not perfect. And anyway, I can tell you, I can go on and on and on about stories and humility. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah,
We'll save that
I
for
think
another
for sure you're
episode.
right. Yeah, yeah. So with that, I just want to share with everybody on johnsuzuki.com, launching this week. I know I've said this several weeks ago, but launching this week, I am going to have a resources page on johnsuzuki.com, and it's going to have um, uh, the contact information, uh, tips and tricks, whatever. For example, with whatever Nicole is willing to share with us, it will be in my resources center, and she'll offer her contact information, and things we can do to make this world a little bit better through our own leadership. So with that, any last comments, Nicole?
No, I just want to thank you for an amazing conversation today. And yes, and it is all about making ourselves, our teams, our organizations, our communities, and our world a better place through those opportunities that we have to lead in a way that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, that's right. And that Renaissance of the heart, you're right in the middle of it with me. So thank you very much. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Yeah, so with that, folks, check it out at johnsuzuki.com. Go to the resources page. It'll be available by the end of this week. And well, actually, it's available now because by the time let's just say the end of the week. Um, but anyway, please subscribe. Please share this. And Nicole, you're amazing. I love you. God bless you. Thank you for joining me. And all of you out there, I love you. God bless you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Finding Better. Bye.